and specifically to talk about mothering and how the way we mother, the way we mothered, impacts how we connect to emotions, which is important for well-being. And for us in particular, grief recovery, and going even deeper than that, trauma healing, and even deeper than that, at the end of the day, it's one of the most important things in terms, emotional connection is the most important things in terms of suicide prevention, isn't it? And as an introduction to Maddie and I, how we met and why we're here, we write about and we talk about our healing journey after loss by suicide, our grief recovery, and how we support our children and stuff like that. And we met on a online writing course, didn't we, Maddie? And we're both writing about our experiences of healing after loss by suicide. And I'm still writing. You've published a book. So do you want to explain that? I mean, we did talk about it last time, but I think we need to revisit it every time. So do you want to just explain a bit?
Yep. So it's giving a voice to the child left behind. So it's my adult and child perspective of what it was like to lose my dad in childhood suicide. And I think it's sort of the first time that I'd ever really spoken about it felt as a child, how it kind of stayed within me for them years until I was ready to pick it apart, process it, feel it as an adult. And an opportunity then just to share the lived experience of what would have helped me, what could have helped me, and ultimately I hope that can give insight to adults that are supporting children now with this complex grief.
Yeah. Yes, and when we were writing, we were sort of chatting quite a lot, weren't we, online? And I think both of us found our chapter around our mums, talking about our mums and our mothering, which for me is, I feel, the heart of my book. And I've been very focused on it this month because it started off with Mother's Day on the 31st of March, and then revisiting my chapter that I've written on mothering for my book, which is called I See You, a mother's story of whole family healing after loss by suicide, and whole family as in me, healing me and helping to support my children with their healing, but also going deeper than that, my relationship with my mum, her relationship with her mum, and through the generations. And it's been a really difficult month, challenging month, going back to that chapter, editing it, summarising it for my Substack post, because I'm trying to align my Substack posts with my chapters to keep me accountable to writing and publishing, because you've published really within a year of the course?
Yeah, it was that first year.
Which is amazing, and I'm still... And I'll talk about a little bit about that later, maybe, if it feels relevant. But yes, still really slogging through and writing this chapter on mothering. And, you know, on the 28th of April is the 6th anniversary of me losing my mum. So it's quite a heavy month. And because mothering is the heart of my book, it is the most challenging chapter to write. And would you, when you were writing, you kind of explained that it was difficult. Would you say it was the most difficult chapter?
Yeah, I think so. Which I kind of wrote about, that was probably quite surprising. I was writing about the loss of dad, suicide, but actually, yeah, one of the hardest to write and to process, sort of that relationship that I'd had with my mum after that, and being able to be, well, give that voice to my inner child, how my inner child felt. And I think it can be quite sort of, as adults, we kind of protect our mothers and protect actions. And, once we become mothers ourselves, kind of get that understanding that, we do our best. We do our best with what we have, we know. Um, but I think I found that meant that I'd never really validated my inner child and how my child had actually felt. It was a good opportunity to be able to process that actually I felt quite isolated and alone and neglected with the grief, because back 30 odd years ago, it was a very taboo subject and it wasn't spoken about. Um, so yeah, it was in amongst all the other things that I had to pick apart and to process. I think ultimately, sort of like, that relationship that you have with the parent that's left to support you, was really difficult.
And would you say that you mentioned that was partly because you were kind of brought up wanting to protect your mum in a way?
Yeah, I think sort of, the abandonment that you had from one parent to know that another was kind of left with their own grief as well, and obviously it being a very tragic circumstance for her to have to navigate, and wasn't expected at all. Um, so I think we do kind of have that inner thing where we want to protect, don't we? And we want to say, she did her best and she was strong and she was amazing. But it just, I don't know how to kind of put it into words, but it just meant that kind of child inside me didn't get her voice and how she felt about it from that perspective. So it didn't really allow to connect to those feelings that I had, that, potentially that mothering wasn't necessarily there. Um,
And because she was, her mind was filled with sort of the shock and grieving herself, that there wasn't enough to give.
so yeah, and I think it's just sort of the in general, like we're seeing a bit better in society now, that there is support, and is probably a lot more therapy and support groups and online places where people can connect and discuss, you know, how they're feeling and what it feels like. Whereas, you can see quite clearly back then, it just was a topic that people didn't approach. It was almost sort of that generation of, if we don't speak about this, it didn't happen.
Absolutely. I mean, that just popped into my head then, was John's parents, saying when they were parenting, John, there wasn't a discussion even around mental health,
Mhm.
emotional well-being. That just wasn't discussed. As parents, you fed your children, you looked after them, you got them to school, you gave them extracurricular activities, you went out on family days, you did all that parenting, but that emotional connection, that mental health side of things, wasn't the awareness that we have now, was there? And parenting style of the time was actually quite dismissive of emotions, and it has been up until quite recently, hasn't it, that actually you focus on behaviours, you ignore bad behaviours by putting kids on the naughty step, you send them to your room, you isolate them, you dismiss the emotions underneath that is driving the behaviours, and that is, and tears are considered manipulative, aren't they, even naughty, um over dramatic, oversensitive, all these terms that are used to try and stop a child from crying. I mean, I hear it now, even now, children told off for crying in the street. From the older generation, actually. Don't hear it as much from the younger generations, but we live in a kind of holiday resort type place. So you get big extended families coming on holiday, and it's children, toddlers whinging. I mean, it's painful sometimes, isn't it, to hear that? But you hear the grandparents, oh, snap out of it, stop, you're ruining everybody's day. And so right from the word go, that generation in particular, are very intolerant of emotions, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think it was definitely, like you say, about the mental health side of it, was definitely more of a stigma, and it wasn't discussed, and it wasn't, it was more like, I suppose, sort of mental health institutions and things. People were, taken out of society for that and not supported. So, yeah, I think that there was, yeah. And again, this sort of like feeds back into, I guess, like as an adult, why I found it difficult with that chapter, because obviously as an adult now I can and realize that difference in society and how we talk about things. So even more so, like you're not sort of justifying that behavior, but you're you're protecting your parents or your mum in being like, well, that's how it was back in the time.
Yeah,
But in doing that, that doesn't allow for us to sort of dig a bit deeper into how we felt about that then.
yeah,
And it is sort of that further education and knowledge, and how, like you say, society is beginning to understand more about emotions and grief and supporting children with that. um, that it opens up that opportunity, I guess, like for us as adults that have carried that around for so many years, to be able to finally sort of make sense of it.
yeah, absolutely. So it's like we're kind of respectful of parenting and the limitations of awareness and understanding for that generation. But of course, there's the next generation, and our children will be the next generation on from us. Learning and doing things differently doesn't mean that we're being critical.
Yeah.
Um, it's we're being critical not to be judgmental, and to we're being critical because we want to improve things, don't we? And I mean, this is what I was kind of talking to you earlier, wasn't it? I was talking to you, why am I writing something that's so difficult and so challenging to write about? And this is the heart of my chapter on mothering. Why am I finding it so difficult to write about? But why am I doing it, and why am I sharing when it's actually quite scary? Because I think we make allowances for our parents and how they parented, because of course we needed that connection for survival. So we had to almost like put up with what we were offered, because it was either that or nothing, and being abandoned or being ignored or being just completely dismissed. So we kind of had to be that person then, but now we don't need to be that person, do we? Because actually we can honor all of our feelings and emotions, because it is absolutely okay to do that, and fundamental actually to our well-being, to and in our healing. I think that's why we're sharing, isn't it? Because I think for both of us, we've had this unique opportunity to write this all out, really process it and understand it, and not many people have that amount of time. I mean, feel this is my full-time job, really, on top of looking after the kids and my other two businesses that earn me some income. But this is like, I do have opportunity to really unravel this, and there's almost like a sense of, it's almost like a calling that having having given so much time to writing and figuring this all out for myself, it's like I want to fast track people to this learning and awareness, almost, because not everybody has that opportunity to really delve into things in this much depth.
But I think also as well, it's sort of like that opportunity to verbalize and discuss what goes on in our minds. And I think, like we've spoken about before, like the biggest part of this was to grow up, or even into adulthood, to feel these feelings and have these thoughts and think that you're the only one.
Yeah,
So I think being able to discuss and just talk through that process and how we come to this point of healing, and how we have been able, like you say, to pick apart some layers and look at things that you might not, again, like when we're talking about the loss of a parent to suicide, when you first start that, or when I first started that, I never realised the impact of my mum's parenting and how it was with the parent that was left to support, and actually, you know, the impact that that had on not being able to grieve because there wasn't that support. Um, so yeah, I think the opportunity to share that is just to share that lived experience and that knowledge, and just say, you know, it's okay to sort of like be confused about that, and to see that there's a much bigger picture to all of this. I don't know if you felt that, but you know, when I initially started writing, it was literally about the loss of my dad, and that has just opened so many different things that's allowed me to, like you say, delve deeper into them things, and given an opportunity to listen to that child inside me, which in turn has allowed me to let go of so much stuff that I'd held on to. But I'd held on to that because I didn't have a place to share that. So I think, like, what we're trying to sort of like show in talking is that, you know, finding that connection to somebody else that you can freely, openly talk about these things just gives that chance to heal.
Absolutely. And it's that whole witnessing, isn't it? It's feeling witnessed by yourself. By writing your book, your story, you're witnessing your story, making sense of it for yourself. So you're reconnecting to yourself, and parts that have been kind of hidden away in little boxes, haven't they? And it's like bringing that back to our full attention, witnessing ourselves, connecting to ourselves, and then hopefully that will also connect other people so they feel less alone. Because that is the loneliness, I would say, is the biggest part, is the most painful part, is when you have part of your story hidden away that only you are witness to. And you know, I can see that for most of my life, subconsciously, I've been trying to heal that, and then more consciously healing it with writing more in the more recent years. But you know, John, my husband, we were drawn to each other because we instantly connected emotionally, because we both had our wounds, we both had our sensitivities. And he was the first one I told about my childhood sexual abuse. And, you know, writing that out was very difficult. But that emotional connection, my mum wasn't able to see, and I wasn't able to tell her that. And it's, you know, and I have explored, why is that? Why couldn't I tell her that? And why couldn't she see that? Why couldn't she see what was going on? That in a box, hidden for years, hidden in shame, in blame, and you know, writing that out is like lifted. And it's really difficult, really challenging. And I think people wonder, why are you doing it if it's so challenging? But actually holding it in is worse, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's sort of like what you said there about that connection with your mum, to be able to share that and then find it in John. And I think it's really interesting when we potentially maybe see that our mums weren't able to offer that emotional connection, and maybe, well, not maybe, I think definitely that's what I was seeking through childhood, was that emotional connection. And again, like we've said, it links back to different parenting styles throughout the generations, and how, you know, the emotional connection wasn't, you know, such a thing back then. But one of the things I guess I've learned through being able to sort of heal some of this emotion in myself is probably actually learning to be more emotionally available for my children. Because I think when we grow up and we're adults, and kind of probably when I had children, although I knew this was there, I didn't realise the impact of having this that was unhealed had on how I was able to emotionally be available for my children. So it's such a it's such an important thing to be able to do, to be able to, you know, self heal or self reflect and be able to see the impact that that could have on people around you, including your own children, and how that sort of then influences how we mother our children.
Most importantly, our children, isn't it? I mean, it was a light bulb moment literally one evening, and it was a couple of years after John died, and I think it was after my mum and dad had died. So the kids had like, they were our three closest people. My mum and dad lived around the corner from us. My mum and dad moved in and helped us when John died, and then they left and died. And so it was one night, and I was like, I can't offer my children emotional connection because their emotions, their grief, their pain, I was struggling to connect to it because I was struggling to connect to my own, and I struggled to connect to John's and my dad's and my mum's. And I was like, I've got to change this because my kids need me for their grief recovery. They need me to be able to connect to their emotions. And what was going through my mind when my kids, and it still does sometimes, I have to admit, that sometimes I have to notice myself. I clam up my neck, my shoulders, my nervous system. I can feel it freezing when my kids are upset, because for them to be upset makes me think of John's upset, which of course my nervous system isn't thinking logically. It's like them being upset means death. And so I very quickly go from A to B. My fear is escalated. And so I freeze. And so it was a light bulb moment one night when I was like, I've got to be able to connect to my kids' emotions, because otherwise I'm putting us all at risk, because they need an outlet. They need to feel seen. Otherwise, something that's too big to actually for them to contain and keep in their bodies and minds for decades, like I did with my childhood trauma. This is too big for them to carry, and so to lift that risk, it was like this light bulb moment. I've got to learn how to emotionally connect. I've just got to sit with them, not to give them advice, not to try and persuade them to think differently, less negatively, less sad, because that was actually appeasing me, not them. They needed to get it out. And so I realised that I needed to connect to my own emotions. I needed to be able to connect to my own emotions through all that fear, through all that freeze, that neck, body, nervous system freeze. I needed to somehow get better.
And I think as well, it's okay to, when I think back and like you've just said there, we kind of have discussed this quite a lot because we're kind of the other side of it all. You have been the parent that children left to support. I think, it's absolutely okay for, the parent left behind to be in shock and their own grief. And I think, that's one of the things that, again, that I wrote about, that was like, it's okay to say I can't deal with this right now, but it's finding that connection for a child that can, a different adult, or therapy or counselling or whatever that may be, but just to be able to, in that sort of moment of grief, to be like, this is too much for me right now, but that child still needs to be, heard and supported as well. And it's a lot, isn't it? It's a lot to be able to take on that kind of responsibility when your emotions are so all over the place themselves.
For me, even now, I'm 9 years on from losing John and 6 years on from losing my parents. It still feels very much like a full-time job. Giving myself enough space to connect emotionally to my children, myself enough space to connect to my own emotions, a lot of it is written, a lot of it is writing. We talked about this last time, didn't we? How writing helps that emotional connection to ourselves. A lot of it is through writing, and also giving myself, going on my dog walks, nature, being on my own, walking along the coast. That is essential. It's not just like some keep fit regime. That is absolutely essential for my well-being and survival. I go out on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday for my dog walking, running, come back, I do my yoga, I do my meditation, and it's all time that I need to connect to my emotions so that I can then offer that to my children. And then you've got the everyday chores to do. I'm lucky that I've got some income work that is it's flexible work, so I feel very great. I don't feel lucky because of what's happened, but I feel grateful that I can do this at home, whereas I think there's so many people living in poverty that are completely focused on just trying to earn money to put food on the plate. So how are they ever going to have the time and space to work this out or to do this, because it is a full-time job, and the way we're set up, benefits are reducing for bereaved families.
Yeah.
It's not heading in the best direction, is it, for families with kids? And then of course then they're emotionally overwhelmed, they get emotionally unwell and mentally unwell because our society isn't set up to support families of bereavement, especially complex grief, lost by suicide.
Yeah. And like you say, I think like that for both of us that have both sort of like lost our mums now. I don't know whether you're similar, but it is like still that kind of mothering that you yearn for. Like when when you're really struggling with all these things, it's that like, picking up a phone and still having that kind of figure, that person that, it's your mum. No matter like you say, how we can sort of like think about how things were, potentially difficult in the grief and how there was the struggles, there's still always that need, I guess, to have your mum. Um, but again, like I say, that's very difficult that you are a mother yourself. It doesn't stop you from looking for that sort of nurturing and that care. Um, but I think yeah, I think this writing has been amazing in connecting to those emotions and the past trauma, and just being able to make sense of it and to make peace with it, which in turn has kind of allowed like just to accept it and be like, yeah, I accept this now because I understand a lot more because I've given it the time to process it, and that allows, like we've said, like the space, not just I guess emotionally but mentally, and probably even to an extent sort of physically, to be more present as a mother and being able to mother our children and offer those things, because when we're carrying our own trauma and grief, it's hard, isn't it? It's hard to be able to be almost best version of yourself, really.
Uh,
um
yeah, absolutely. And you describing that longing that you have for a mother figure, I carried a lot of shame about that. It made me feel needy, insecure, um, having those needs until I read Mother Hunger. It was a book I read it wasn't last summer, it was the summer before. So very, very recently. And it was like, this is validating my feelings, that hunger. And then it's like, well, actually, mother hunger, of course, everybody needs a mother. A mother in terms of not necessarily from a mother, but from somebody, a primary caregiver, or somebody, whether that's a partner, a husband, wife, partner, everybody needs to feel seen, don't they? Unconditionally loved and accepted for all of their parts, all of their emotions, all of their dark secrets, and all those shameful things that many people carry. And that is like a human. We can't thrive without that unconditional love, that mothering, and so that mother hunger is absolutely, that longing persists, doesn't it? And we've talked about this before, how now we are offering that to ourselves, self-mothering, which is a new term for me and lots of probably people listening to this. Self-mothering, you know, we when our mums have passed, or when our mums have done their jobs as well as they can, we have to carry that on for ourselves, don't we?
And I think there's a sort of, again, that sort of come from right, starting to validate and listen to the inner child. And it's one of them things, isn't it? Like, I think we've spoken about it before, like, you've always heard people talking about self-care and self-love and, you know, self-healing and things like that. And I guess, like, I never really understood it. I never knew what that really meant. Like, I just couldn't. And in listening to that inner child and writing and sharing, and finally, like you say, not being scared to share that side of you, and not to be scared of what people might think about that, has in turn, like you say, made space for that self-care, for that self-love, for that self-mothering, for that, for all them things, I guess, that externally we can yearn for. Actually, learning to find that within is a real comfort, is something that, and again, I guess when you're brought up and you've had trauma, you haven't had those connections, it's really difficult to find that in yourself. But I think, yeah, I just think there's such a huge benefit in just sharing and
Yeah.
talking and having the space and the people that can understand what maybe to you feels like these really deep, dark thoughts that you think, oh, people are never going to understand that that's how I feel. And actually, when you sort of find that person, like with you, that you can actually share that with without judgment, you you find that space to find the things that you enjoy again and that make you feel good. Like you say, I'm very similar. Dog walking, feeding the birds, just living in the moment again. And I think, again, like when you've talked about the nervous system and things, we have lived in survival mode for a very long time, and it's almost like you can feel your body coming out of that. You can feel your body starting to relax as you let go of the emotions and the stress that you've carried. I remember somebody sort of like saying, you can bury it and try to ignore it, but at some point that seed is going to grow out of you and try and find a way out. And
the thing is, if there's unresolved Pip, I'm not stroking it at the moment, I'm talking.
as you can see, that's what I've been doing down here, keeping the dog quiet, stroking.
It's quite nice to stroke her at the same time as talking. And it's kind of that sort of surface level stuff with the self-care, like having a nice hot bath, having hot drinks, going out running, walking along the coast with my dog. The deeper thing that is doing is actually, if you allow it, is to actually be able to start connecting to yourself and your emotions and releasing it. And, it's like the movement and nature and peace facilitate that, don't they? And so self-care on one level is, oh, yes, let's go out for a run and keep fit and supple. But deeper value in it, where we're actually releasing deep trauma with deep emotions that are around those traumatic events. We're finally connecting to that and releasing that. So yeah, it's there's always that deeper level, isn't there? And I think that's that's what I feel grateful for, that we are able to have these deep chats. What's going on the set. Yes, it's good to talk about mental health and stuff like that, but actually the deeper stuff is that we're talking about stuff that's been previously hidden, and we're releasing emotions around those traumatic events by talking about it and releasing toxins. I mean, they're toxins, aren't they, that we're carrying around, which isn't good for anybody. And it does, if you try and suppress it and keep it hidden and boxed in, it does impact relationships without you even realizing. Because that's the other thing. It's like, when people say, why are you spending so much time addressing all of this? And it's because actually I want to, find more joy in my life, have healthier relationships that aren't impacted by me subconsciously projecting my past trauma. And with the kids, that is, shutting down their emotions, trying not to shut down their emotions. So yeah, it's having that opportunity for the deeper work, isn't it?
Definitely. And I think, both of us found something very powerful in writing.
Yeah.
And to begin with, like you say, ultimately when I started writing, it was for me. It was just for me, and picking it apart, and then to get to a stage where, this could have just gone on a shelf, gone dusty, gone, but to share that, I think, is almost another step in accepting yourself, accepting your experience, because it has been something that's been so hidden away and not talked about. And to, it does, there is a self empowerment into that, to be, do you know what, yeah, this did happen and this is how it felt, and this is how it feels now that you're healing and letting go of them things. And it's sharing that, being brave enough to go, it doesn't have to just only live in your head. It can help other people, and it can. And I think, sort of, like, sometimes that explanation to it, like, exactly how you've just explained, what happens within ourselves when we start self-care and we start looking after ourselves, and finding joy and sitting with our feelings and processing them. That's not always sort of explained to people. Like I just said, when it's like, when people were talking about self-care and self-love, it was like, what is that, and what does that look like, and how do you achieve that? And to have that sort of, I guess, sort of deeper understanding, which actually is learning to sit with your feelings, sit with your trauma, and to process that and to pick it apart. And even for yourself, not even necessarily to share, but what did that teach me? How would I maybe handle this situation again differently? Or, yeah, it's and it doesn't end there, does it? It continues. Like, every there is no sort of end point to it, to go, all right, I've written a book now and published it, and I'm completely healed. Like you say, the next stage has been learning more about spending time with myself, finding things that I find happiness in, and things I enjoy. And again, I think when we hold on to trauma, and when we stay in that place where we're unhealed, you are in that survival mode. You don't know what makes you happy, because you don't really have the capacity to try other things. So it's kind of opened a whole new chapter, a whole new life. And it's a nice feeling to kind of know that you're actively healing, and active, and a part of that is being able to, like this, sit and actually talk about it.
And it's an ongoing thing, isn't it? I mean, we talk about grief recovery, and there's certain parts of this that you will Pip, that you'll Pip, come here. Sorry, my dog. There's certain parts that you completely recover from, but there's parts that will be ongoing for life, won't there? And I think what is pertinent to this is there's so many things in our lives that prevent us from opening up, aren't there? There's so many things to keep people safe, a sense of safety. There's so many things that stop us from sharing our stories and sharing our emotions, aren't there? And that ultimately comes from fear, doesn't it? And that comes from fear that we've inherited from past generations, because it probably goes back to the war, where of course you couldn't survive everyday life if you were talking about your emotions and your children overseas fighting. And to actually just survive day to day, there must have been a lot of shutdown. They were in an anxious freeze state, shutdown state, where that part was compartmentalized. And of course, we've inherited that, haven't we? And that's why we do find it so difficult to share our stories. And there was a lot of shame and blame and emotion, mixed emotions, sharing my story. And I've done it now, and yeah, those feelings still exist, they still persist, but they are easing. And maybe they will never ease completely. Maybe there will always be this awkwardness around talking about my childhood experiences because it wasn't nice. But I've told people now, and actually people can see that now, and they can see that, why that happened. And then you then do have more headspace, don't you, to then offer your children what they need. And of course, we're already doing that because we're already helping our children, aren't we? As well as helping other people who read your book, you're having a direct impact on how you're mothering straight away. And yeah, I think that's so important.
Definitely.
So we've been chatting for about 45 minutes. Maddie, shall we wrap up there? Is there anything else? I've written a few notes. We've talked about mothering today. The next time, I hope we can get together and talk about how, parenting the older child and how the education system is set up, and how that can impact the way our children connect to their emotions, how we're dealt with at school. We've had experience with our own children with school attendance difficulties. It's challenging difficulties at school. So we'll, hopefully have a chat about that in a couple of months' time. So yeah, I think that wraps it up, really, doesn't it, for today? And yeah, it's hard, isn't it? It's hard talking about it. I feel quite flushed. It's so important to talk about this, and mothering is such a important topic, isn't it? Because we all start from a mother. This isn't just relevant for mothers, this is relevant for everybody, because we all come from a mother. So that's how I'd like to finish. Have you got any final point you'd like to say before we...
No, I think we've covered quite a lot in there today, chatting away. As always, it's lovely to talk to you. Just, yeah, when you find somebody that you can just connect and talk to, there isn't any anxiety or, oh, did I say that right? Did I say that wrong? Or whatever. It's just chat to somebody that can, relate and listen. And yeah, I think that's one of the key things that we both want to raise awareness for, is just finding somebody you can connect to and share this stuff with. It really is life changing.
Absolutely is. It's the power of feeling seen, isn't it? The power of feeling seen, of being witness for all of yourself, all of your past, and having somebody. And if you haven't got that somebody yet, writing is a good place to start. Start with yourself, start with writing, and then see where that takes you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, lots of love to you and everybody here who's watching either live now or replay. Okay, bye for now. Bye.